Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be providing an update to the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, Bitcoin actually had a nice move back up last week to the tune of about 7%. Not quite at all-time highs just yet, but also not that far away either. You can see Bitcoin right now is coming in right around $108,000, $109,000. So not too far away from the prior all-time highs. The bull market support band, which again consists of the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA, ranges from around 95.6K up to about 98.4K. So, Bitcoin has continued to mostly stay near the highs basically since early May. The price action hasn't really done a whole lot. We've gone up a little, we've gone down a little, but the bull market support band has actually gone higher. What's really interesting, though, is that, this cycle, the 50-week SMA has actually been a much better sort of harbinger of the bull market over the bull market support band. You can see there have been a few instances where Bitcoin went below the bull market support band, namely in Q3 of 2023 and Q3 of 2024. And then it did so again, but in Q1 and early Q2 of 2025. And of course, the question is, will Bitcoin repeat this pattern where it gets a pullback below the bull market support band in the third quarter of the year? Obviously, we've talked about this idea for a while. We are now entering into the third quarter of the year this week. And so I guess that theory will come to be tested. Obviously, I can't know for sure what's going to happen. And that's the reason why I say no one can predict the future. The best thing to do is just DCA assets that you want to own long term. That's generally going to be trying to time the market. And also because of the views that we've expressed multiple times about Bitcoin dominance, Bitcoin gives you exposure to the upside, also minimizes your downside risk. So in a scenario where if Bitcoin were to drop to, say, the 50-week SMA in Q3, like it did the last two Q3s, there's still a good chance that it would then bounce off of that level and come right back up. Whereas if it did that, it would probably leave altcoins quite a bit lower. And there's always the chance that Bitcoin doesn't do that and instead goes up in the third quarter of the year, right? There's always a chance that it does that. In fact, if you look at monthly returns for Bitcoin, and you just look at, say, 2017, you can see that Bitcoin actually went up in July and August of 2017 and then still got the Q3 pullback, but it was to a much higher level, right? It was a pullback to a price that was higher than where July started. So it's certainly not out of the question that you see something like that occur, but I just wanted to provide that update and if you guys remember back in Q1, we said that as long as Bitcoin does not go below the 2024 high, then the next rally, the Death Cross rally, could lead to a higher high, a new all-time high. What's really interesting is that all-time high so far, that high was hit on the day, I believe, of the Golden Cross, right? So the low was the day of the Death Cross, and then the next high was the day of the Golden Cross. Once again, showing you that the name of the metric that you're looking at is kind of suggests the opposite was actually going to occur. But what I would say is that on future pullbacks, whenever they may be, whether it's later on in Q3, like August or something, I would argue at this point that the integrity of the bull market remains intact so long as the 50-week SMA holds as support. In fact, you can see that a lot of the prior cycles, as long as the 50-week held as support, then the cycle continued. But whenever the 50-week SMA broke, the cycle was over. And that has not happened yet this cycle. It's kind of a similar idea. It's a similar observation, not quite the same thing, but as the 200-week SMA observation, right? The observation that basically Bitcoin's prior peaks have coincided roughly when the 200-week SMA of Bitcoin crosses the prior all-time high, Exhibit A, and then Exhibit B, and then Exhibit C. But you should know that in the last cycle, it actually occurred a couple, maybe a couple months after the peak. Okay. But the 2 cycles before that, it was almost perfectly timed in terms of when the 200-week SMA crossed the prior all-time high. That was when the top was in. Last cycle, it would have missed it by a couple of months. It might miss it again this cycle. But there's some different observations you can make about the cycle just based on some of these really simple things, like the 200-week SMA and the 50-week moving average, right? The integrity of the bull market's intact as long as we have weekly closes above that, and so on and so forth, right? And the 50-week SMA right now is around 86K, right? So, I mean, if there is a pullback later on in Q3, then hopefully that level would hold. And if it does, then there's a good chance that the next higher low would then lead to another higher high, just like the one we just got did. And even right now, I mean, there's nothing necessarily saying that it can't go to a new all-time high or, a new cycle high in July. Normally, the Q3 pullbacks that we see in Bitcoin have occurred around August, right? I mean, this drop here below the bull marks we're up in 2023 occurred in August. The one last year also really occurred in late July, early August, although there was a sort of another one that occurred in July. And if you actually look at 2023, Bitcoin had this big move up, and then it kind of consolidated there for a while and kept like wicking higher to new all-time highs. And the weakness that came in didn't really show itself until August, in fact. So that is something to keep in mind for Bitcoin. Again, I can't predict what's going to happen in the short term. I have absolutely no idea. The only thing I really stick by with the crypto markets is that Bitcoin is a better place to be than the altcoin market. So I choose to keep most of my crypto portfolio in Bitcoin rather than altcoins because I think altcoins are going to keep bleeding back to Bitcoin. I accept the risk that Bitcoin could go lower, but I'm not overly concerned about Bitcoin, even if it does go lower, as long as that 50-week SMA continues to hold as support whenever it gets tested, whether it gets tested again in Q3 or Q4, whatever. As long as that holds as support, then I'm not really questioning the integrity of the bull market. Whenever that breaks, that's obviously when the question or the integrity more so comes into question. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. I don't want to keep this one too long. I mean, obviously, price action is going to be all over the place this week. We have a lot of data coming in. If you look at the macro dashboard here on the Into the Cryptoverse website, you can see we've got a ton of stuff coming in on Tuesday: hires, job openings, job quits, etc., layoffs, and then later this week we've got the unemployment rate. And all that stuff. So should be a pretty volatile week, would be my guess, because the market's going to be sort of chasing one narrative depending on where this stuff comes in. Hopefully it comes in great. And if it does, then Bitcoin will hopefully use that opportunity to move higher. Remember, the markets don't need a reason to go up. They need a reason to go down. And if the unemployment rate comes in low and inflation comes in low, then usually that's a reason for Bitcoin to go higher. The only thing at that point that could kind of stop it, other than geopolitical events, would be something like if the long end of the yield curve starts to say, all right, well, I got it. The long end might have to go higher if they start pricing in rate cuts if the economy starts to accelerate again. So let's see where the unemployment rate comes in. And we'll talk about that when it happens. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.